David had always believed that money would get easier with age. In his early 20s, he figured that once he got a decent job, everything would fall into place. But now, at 32, with a steady office job, things felt no better. He wasn't poor, but he wasn't secure either. Every paycheck seemed to vanish into rent, bills, food, and a dozen small expenses that added up faster than he could keep track of. He often found himself wondering, where does it all go? He wasn't reckless. He didn't splurge on designer clothes or fancy gadgets. Yet, month after month, his bank account barely survived. Saving felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. Investing? That was for people with extra money, not for someone like him, who considered it a win if his balance wasn't in the red by the 25th of the month. The worst part wasn't the lack of money. It was the lack of control. David felt like he was drifting, working hard, staying afloat, but going nowhere. He'd tried budgeting apps, spreadsheets, and even financial podcasts, but nothing seemed to stick. They all assumed he had more money, more time, more willpower than he did. So eventually, he gave up trying to change. One night, while scrolling aimlessly through his phone, he came across a simple quote: "Start where you are. Use what you have. Do what you can." It wasn't new. He'd probably seen it before. But something about that night, the silence of his apartment, the exhaustion in his body, made it hit different. Maybe, he thought, he'd been trying too hard to fix everything at once. Maybe the real answer was to stop aiming for big leaps and just take one small step. But what step? What could he do, right now, with almost no extra money, that would give him back a sense of control? That's when the idea came. What if he started by saving just $1 a day? Just $1. Not 10, not 50. 1. It sounded almost laughable. What difference could a dollar make? But maybe the point wasn't the dollar. Maybe the point was the habit, the consistency, the commitment. He pulled out an old envelope from his desk drawer and wrote on it in black marker, $1 a day. He put in his first dollar bill. It felt ridiculous, but it also felt honest. It was the first financial commitment he'd made in months that didn't feel like a lie. No big goals, no huge promises, just $1 quietly set aside. David didn't tell anyone. It wasn't worth announcing. But the next day, he added another $1. Then, the day after that. And somehow, that small daily act began to shift something inside him. He wasn't just saving money. He was saving belief in himself. By the end of the first week, David had $7 in the envelope. It was barely enough for a coffee in the city. But to him, it felt like a small treasure. Each dollar was a quiet victory, proof that he could commit to something, no matter how small. More importantly, it was a habit he didn't dread. It took seconds. No mental battle, no overthinking. Just a simple action. Slide $1 into the envelope. Done. After years of trying and failing to manage his money, this was the first time he didn't feel overwhelmed. There were no spreadsheets, no pressure to figure it all out, no guilt. Just $1 each day. He taped the envelope to the inside of his closet door, out of sight, but accessible. Every morning, after brushing his teeth, he'd pull out $1 and slip it in. The ritual took less than a minute, but it grounded him. It reminded him, I am building something. The routine gave his morning structure. Before, his days often began with noise, emails, social media, rushing out the door. But now, his first action was intentional, quiet, purposeful. It set a different tone. It wasn't about the money yet. It was about the discipline. As the weeks went by, David began to pair the habit with a simple log. He kept a tiny notebook in his drawer and wrote the date next to each dollar added. Just the date and the number. Day 8, $8. It was the most basic form of tracking, but the growing list became a visual of his consistency. There were no skip days, and that mattered more to him than the total amount. By the third week, David noticed something surprising. His awareness of money had sharpened. Not because of the dollar itself, but because he was thinking about money daily in a way that felt empowering. He started noticing where small amounts slipped away. An impulse snack at the gas station, a random app subscription he didn't use, the overpriced coffee he didn't even enjoy. He wasn't judging himself, just observing. And that awareness, born from the $1 habit, started to change the way he moved through the world. One afternoon, a co-worker invited him to lunch. Normally, David would have gone without a second thought. But this time he hesitated. Not because he didn't want to spend, but because he had a goal now. A streak, a rhythm. He declined politely and ate the lunch he brought from home. That dollar he saved went straight into the envelope that night. And it felt good. Like a small but important decision. The habit began to ripple into other areas. If $1 a day was possible, what else was? David started doing 5 push-ups every morning after dropping the dollar in. Then 10. It became another micro habit attached to the first. He didn't plan it. It just happened. That's what consistency does. It builds identity. He no longer saw himself as someone who failed at habits. He was becoming someone who followed through. Around week 6, the envelope started to feel thick. There was a satisfying weight to it. He counted it for the first time since starting, $42. Still not much in a practical sense, but emotionally, it felt like thousands. Why? Because it was built through his own hands, through effort, not hope, through intention, not accident. One night, lying in bed, David thought about what this envelope really meant. It wasn't savings, not yet. It was proof. Proof that change doesn't come from giant leaps. It comes from showing up every single day, even when no one's watching. His confidence began to grow, not in a loud or dramatic way, but quietly, like the slow swell of a tide. He started wondering, what could happen if he kept this up for a year? 365, just from doing what now felt effortless. That number, once laughable, now looked like a milestone. Not for its size, but for what it represented. Commitment, direction, momentum, and perhaps the most powerful shift of all. He started looking forward to it. The $1 habit had gone from an experiment to a part of who he was. Some days, he didn't even remember doing it. It was that automatic. But every time he saw the envelope, it reminded him that he was capable of building something, slowly and surely. There were no shortcuts, no breakthroughs, no overnight wins. But for the first time, David didn't need any of that. He had his process, he had his pace, and he had his envelope. By the end of the year, David had saved $365. He sat at his desk on a quiet Sunday afternoon, carefully counting each bill, stacking them in neat piles. It wasn't life-changing money. It wouldn't pay off his student loans, buy a car, or even cover rent. But as he looked at the money he had built, $1 at a time, he didn't feel small. He felt powerful. Because for the first time, David had proof, not of wealth, but of consistency. And that was worth more than the money itself. He could have spent it. After all, he'd earned it. A nice dinner, a short trip, or maybe a new phone. But deep down, David knew that spending it would break something sacred. This wasn't just cash. This was a symbol of discipline, patience, and growth. It deserved a purpose beyond consumption. He opened his laptop and typed into Google, "How to invest with 365 DA." It was a world he'd always avoided, one that felt too complicated, too intimidating. Stocks, ETFs, crypto, index funds. The jargon alone was enough to make him close the tab. But this time, he didn't click away. He remembered what started all of this. Just $1. He didn't need to master investing in a day. He just needed to take the next small step. He watched a short video about index funds, then read a beginner's guide to fractional shares. He scribbled down notes. There were terms he didn't fully understand, but he kept going. Not for hours, just 15 minutes. That was enough. Enough to learn something new without overwhelming himself. By the end of the week, he had created an account on an investing platform that allowed low-entry, no-fee investing. He connected his bank, verified his identity, and transferred the $365. His hand hovered for a moment before hitting the final button, buy. He selected a simple broad market ETF, low risk, long term. Not exciting, but stable, reliable. It was the investing equivalent of his $1-a-day habit. And that's exactly what he wanted. When the confirmation appeared, "You've invested $365. David felt something shift. He was no longer just a saver. He was an investor. Not in the traditional sense, with portfolios and financial advisors, but in the truest sense. Someone who takes small seeds and plants them with intention. That moment changed everything. Because once he'd broken through the fear of starting, it all became easier. He didn't binge invest. He didn't suddenly pour in hundreds more. He simply added $5 here, $10 there. Every Friday, he set aside a small amount, whatever he could, and transferred it in. Some weeks it was $3, some weeks $20. The amount didn't matter, the habit did. Alongside that, he kept learning, little by little. He listened to podcasts on his commute. He followed a few YouTube creators who simplified complex topics. He didn't try to become a financial expert. He just tried to understand enough to make thoughtful decisions. One day, at work, a colleague mentioned investing in a trendy tech stock. The old David might have jumped on it, chasing excitement, hoping for fast money. But this time, he asked questions. He compared it to the index funds he understood. He read, reflected, and passed. Not because he was afraid, but because he was focused. He wasn't chasing noise. He was building something solid. As the months went by, his small investments began to grow, slowly, quietly, and consistently. Nothing flashy. But David wasn't looking for fireworks. He was building a foundation. He created a new envelope, this one labeled Investment Fuel. Every time he saved money from skipping a coffee, saying no to impulse buys, or cooking at home, he slipped a few bills in. It was a game now. How much money could he redirect from waste to growth? That simple shift in mindset was worth more than any stock tip. What began with a single envelope in his closet had now evolved into a system. One he designed, one he understood, and one he trusted. For the first time, David no longer felt at the mercy of his finances. He felt like the architect of his financial future. His confidence didn't come from the size of his portfolio. It came from the process. From the fact that he had chosen a path, stuck to it, and proven to himself that small, intentional steps could lead to meaningful change. Most people overestimate what they can do in a day and underestimate what they can do in a year. David now understood that truth with every fiber of his being. $1 had become hundreds. A habit had become a lifestyle. And a man who once felt lost with money was now investing in his future, not with fear, but with quiet certainty. David didn't realize the shift at first. It came quietly, not as a revelation, but as a slow redefinition of who he was. He had always seen himself as someone bad with money. That identity had lived in him for years, reinforced by every overdraft notice, every failed budget, every feeling of shame when he checked his account. But now, those beliefs no longer felt true. He didn't just have more money, he had more control, more awareness, more intention. The dollar-a-day habit had done something deeper than improve his finances. It had reshaped the way he saw himself. He was no longer someone who avoided bank statements. He checked them regularly now, not obsessively, but with curiosity and calm. He was no longer someone who gave up on goals. He had proof, real, daily proof, that he could stick with something. He was no longer drifting. He had direction, and that, more than the money itself, changed everything. It was like rewiring a part of his brain. When he walked past stores, he didn't feel the usual pull to buy something just to feel better. He paused. He asked, "Do I actually want this? Or is this just noise?" Most of the time, the answer surprised him. He didn't want more things. He wanted more freedom, more peace, and his habits were finally aligned with that desire. From that clarity, other habits began to form, not because he forced them, but because they naturally attached themselves to the new identity he was building. He started walking every morning before work. Just 10 minutes at first, then 15. He didn't listen to music or podcasts. Just let his mind wander, breathe fresh air, feel his body move. It grounded him. It made his mind sharper throughout the day. He cut back on alcohol, not because of a strict rule, but because it no longer fit. Late nights and foggy mornings didn't serve the version of himself he was becoming. He started journaling. Nothing fancy, just a few lines each evening. What went well, what he noticed, what he was grateful for. It made him more present, more appreciative. Most importantly, he became more intentional with his time. He stopped doom scrolling through his phone every evening. Instead, he set a timer. 15 minutes of reading, 15 minutes of planning tomorrow, 15 minutes of silence. These weren't rigid routines. They were flexible frameworks that reminded him of what mattered. The people around him began to notice. His friends saw a calmer, more grounded version of David. He didn't complain about money anymore. He didn't brag either. He just carried himself differently. There was a quiet confidence about him now, the kind that doesn't need to be announced. One evening, over dinner, his friend Julia asked, "You've changed. What happened?" David thought for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "I started saving $1 a day." She laughed, thinking he was joking. But he wasn't. He explained the envelope, the habit, the investment, the ripple effect. He told her how one small action had opened the door to an entirely different way of living. And she listened, really listened. Because deep down, she was struggling too. Not with money necessarily, but with that same feeling of being stuck. And maybe, just maybe, David had found a way out. From that conversation, more followed. David wasn't trying to become a guru or a teacher, but his story resonated. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real, achievable, human. People started asking him questions. How do you start? How do you stay consistent? How do you deal with setbacks? His answers were always simple. Start small. Don't aim for perfect. Track your progress. Let your habits become your identity. He didn't claim to have all the answers, but he knew this much. The man he used to be, and the man he was becoming were worlds apart. And that gap had been closed not by some massive leap, but by daily steps so small they were almost invisible. One night, as he lay in bed, he opened his journal and wrote, "I no longer chase motivation, I build momentum." It was a simple line, but it captured everything. He had spent so many years waiting to feel ready. But now he understood. Readiness wasn't a feeling. It was a decision, a choice made in the quiet of ordinary days. Looking back, David marveled at how much had changed from one tiny habit. One envelope, $1. The transformation wasn't loud or flashy, but it was real. It was deep, and it was permanent. Because the truth was, he didn't just change his finances. He changed his relationship with discipline, with focus, with himself. And from that place, that strong, quiet center, he could build anything. It had been nearly 5 years since David dropped that first dollar into an envelope. He still remembered the feeling, the hesitation, the quiet doubt, the voice in his head whispering, "This won't make a difference." But he did it anyway. Not because he believed it would change his life, but because it was something he could do. Something small. Something consistent. Now, 5 years later, everything had changed. David sat at the same desk where it all began. But this time, he wasn't counting dollar bills. He was reviewing his investment portfolio, a diverse collection of index funds, dividend stocks, and even a few well-researched individual plays. It wasn't about chasing wealth. It was about building a life, slowly, patiently, and intentionally. He still wasn't rich by the world's standards. He didn't drive a luxury car or live in a high-rise. But he had zero debt, a growing investment account, and, most importantly, freedom. Freedom to say no to things that didn't align with his values. Freedom to take time off without panic. Freedom to help his sister with her rent when she was in a rough spot. Not because he had to, but because he could. And when people asked how he did it, his answer never changed. "I started by saving $1 a day." They'd usually laugh, thinking he was being humble. But he wasn't. That $1 wasn't magic. It was a signal, a declaration, a quiet commitment to a better version of himself. It wasn't about the amount, it was about the act. That first dollar built discipline. That discipline built momentum. That momentum built confidence. And that confidence reshaped his identity, one decision at a time. Looking back, David could see how the habit had expanded beyond money. It had seeped into every part of his life. He read more, moved more, listened more. He became someone who followed through, who didn't just make promises. He kept them. Not because it was easy, but because he'd learned how to trust himself again. He thought about all the times he almost gave up, when it felt too slow, too small, too pointless. But now, sitting with a quiet mind and a full heart, he was grateful for every single day he didn't quit. Because here's the truth no one talks about. Life rarely changes overnight. Real transformation happens in silence, in the tiny, unsexy, invisible moments when you show up, even when no one's watching. It happens when you decide to keep going. And maybe that's why this story matters. Not because David did something extraordinary, but because he didn't. He did something anyone could do. Something you could do. You don't need a windfall, a breakthrough, or a perfect plan. You don't need to wait for the right time or feel fully motivated. You just need to begin, right where you are, with what you have. Maybe it's $1, maybe it's one push-up, maybe it's one page of a book, 1 minute of stillness, one act of kindness. The size doesn't matter. What matters is the rhythm, the consistency, the quiet power of repetition. So here's the question. What's your $1-a-day habit? What's the small, simple thing you can do today and again tomorrow that your future self will thank you for? Because 5 years from now, you could be sitting at your own desk, looking back at a journey that began with something so small, it almost felt like nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was the beginning of everything. Thank you for listening to David's story. If it made you feel something, hope, belief, possibility, don't let that feeling fade. Act on it. Even if it's just for 1 minute, even if it's just $1, your future is already waiting, and it starts with what you do right now.